Great afternoon, everybody. We've got the after lunch slot, so we'll try and keep you all awake. I'm Charlotte Williams. I'm one of the group directors across the Mid and South Essex University Hospitals Group. And you might think, why on earth have we got a hospital here at a primary care careers conference? That's probably a good question. But we've just come really, I suppose, as a partner in the system to talk to you about some of our experiences over the last 18 months or so of trying to do a bit of clinical digital innovation. What we've learned from the process, and that we're also not all that great at it. But you've heard a lot about policy, and you've heard a lot about standards and a lot about infrastructure and things so far. We're just going to give you some really practical kind of clinical examples of things that we've been doing that might be of interest to you, might be similar to the kinds of things that you're thinking about in terms of looking after patients. And I'm going to talk a little bit about three main examples, including you'll hear from Gary. And then my colleague Sarah is going to talk a little bit more about the challenges of doing some of this stuff in practice. So how do you take digital change forward in our organisations, which, to be fair, it's a bit easier when you've got one board and one executive across most of your staff, and understand primary care is much more challenging than that in terms of being distributed. But hopefully there'll be some lessons that will resonate for you. And then we've got some questions at the end. So crack on, hopefully it'll make sense. So this is our STP across Mid and South Essex. It's now called the Health and Care Partnership, I understand. We've just developed a new 5-year strategy in response to the NHS long-term plan. And it's really just to say the MSE group of hospitals is the only acute provider across the STP, but we know that over time we're going to become an ever more embedded and integrated part of that system. And that's front of mind for us when we're thinking about digital, when we're thinking about workforce and innovation more generally. And these are the kind of key themes that we've identified for our system. And some of the innovations we're going to talk about today address those key clinical areas. I've got Martin Callingham on the stage, just dragged him up because I thought it might be helpful for Martin as the digital lead for our STP area to talk a little bit more about the digital aspect specifically of the strategy. Martin, do you want to say a couple of words about that?
Yes, I sit with two hats on. One hat as the CIO for the acute hospitals, so I've got some understanding of the patch, but also more importantly here as the digital STP lead. So it's my responsibility to try and formulate some of the strategic plans to bring all of our working together so it makes sense, so it starts to align and starts to join. Now, a lot of that work you won't have seen the visibility of that yet, but the stuff that we're doing with Jenny is absolutely about aligning the acute hospitals, the community services, hospices, local authorities, third sector. There's a whole range of that work going on. And whilst at the end of Charlotte's talking to you guys, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'll answer that question about the why don't we have TPP across the whole of the organisations.
Thanks, Martin. So the Mid and South Essex University Hospitals Group is now our name. So it's Southend University Hospital, Mid Essex Hospital Services Trust, and Basman and Thurrock University Hospitals. So we formed a group model about 3 years ago now. So we have a single executive team and boards that meet in common. It's still 3 statutory organisations in terms of being NHS trusts. But we have shared strategic objectives, and these are they on this slide. So these are the things that we're trying to do as an organisation of around nearly 15,000 staff, covering a population of 1.2 million. And I think we were looking at a number of outpatient, like 1.2 million outpatient appointments or something last year. We're going to need to change the way that we work quite radically. We got told by our health planners, we're looking at capital expenditure that if we did nothing else the next 15 years, we'd have to double the number of scanning rooms and double the number of outpatient rooms that we're offering. And we don't want to do that. We don't think that's the right thing to do with public money. So we're looking at becoming a single organisation. We're due to merge, all things being well, political climates as they are, next year. That's our current plan. And an innovative organisation. So we know we need to change, and we're a big hulking, ocean liner of an organisation moving forward, as is the NHS. So how are we going to do that? And I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing so far. So some of the things that we're working on across the hospital group are outpatient transformation. We talked about we can't carry on doing things, as I think Steve Powers said, like something from the Victorian era of bringing people in, queuing for hours to park when you can't. possibly incurring fines because you've overrun your appointment, getting into a crowded outpatient clinic, waiting hours to see somebody, and then possibly not adding a lot of value. That's a scenario that we see fairly regularly. But also getting a bit predictive. We know an awful lot. We see an awful lot of patients in the hospital. We often see them when we could have treated or intervened earlier. So how can we get more predictive with the information that we know, the information that you know, to reach further into populations and go and find people, not wait for patients to get to a point where they're presenting to us. So we're thinking about how we can look, particularly with children's care, particularly with respiratory conditions at the moment, about what we can learn from the information that we know about our patients. We're working through the STP and really looking at not doing anything just from the hospital's perspective. We've got an innovation fellowship, and you'll hear from some of our fellows today. And we're also thinking about this thing called an anchor institution. I don't know if anybody's seen this, but it's the last line in the NHS long-term plan that was published in January. It's about the idea of big institutions like hospitals or universities, big hunks of concrete sat on a roundabout or up over there on the hill, a big shining organisation. What do we do for the people who live and work within our organisation? So how can we procure more locally? How can we support more local people into employment? How can we work better to improve educational standards, reduce inequalities within our area? So we're taking forward a programme focused initially on Basildon, looking at that. And we're also involved in quality improvement. So we coordinate a SDP-wide quality improvement programme for leadership, which includes our hospice, our home care providers, our community and mental health providers, and general practice as well, and working with the Council on Population Health Management. So these are all things we're trying to do to think about not just being a hospital in the traditional sense. So now we're going to talk through a few of our examples of digital innovation. The first of which is Maternity Direct. Now, I'm really sorry that I'm not Leslie Overy, the head of midwifery from Basildon and Thurrock University Hospitals, but as some of you may know, we've currently got a lot of inspections and things going on at the moment, so staff have been called into doing that. So I'm going to talk about this. But if you've got a smartphone, or if you've got a laptop, if you've got an iPad, and you're having a baby, and at the moment you live in Basildon, or you're registered with Basildon Hospital, you can download this secure app, which will allow you to chat to a midwife and see your appointments and see what we call a trusted health information feed. So if you've had a baby or been pregnant recently, you might know that sometimes if you Google the information you get, it can often be from overseas, it can often be unreliable. There is obviously the NHS UK information, but it doesn't necessarily always present itself in a way that is particularly targeted to those population groups. So through this app, you can be assured that the content that you see has been curated by midwives. The midwives are chatting to you in response to your specific questions. It enables supervision, and it gives you a timely response to all non-urgent queries. The great thing about this product is that it was entirely developed by midwives at Basildon Hospital. So in response to pressure on community midwives, being able to return the calls from women with queries, developed a Facebook page. Through our Facebook page, we're able to answer a lot of those questions, but Facebook's not secure and it's not a sustainable option, and we can't archive from it into the care record. So by developing Maternity Direct as an application, women can chat to us, we can chat to them, and all the records, all of those conversations are stored in their maternity record. So that if we ever need to retrieve those, we can. So from an auditable clinical governance perspective, it's secure. So this is a telemedicine app, that's the term we use for it, to resolve women's questions and queries during pregnancy. So the other great thing about this is that we can manage 4,000 to 5,000 women using this application with the equivalent of 1.5 whole-time equivalent midwives. So it's very efficient from a staffing perspective because obviously the queries are much more manageable and a lot of the information that they need to provide is predetermined. So, and it's very popular. We've had the same midwives working on this service for a number of years because they really enjoy the satisfaction that they get from women, and has an 89% excellent approval rating from women as well. So these are some of the features of Maternity Direct, and if you don't know about it in your South West Essex area, then please do promote it, and we're hoping to get rolled out across the other 2 hospital sites very soon. But I suppose this is just an example of our own midwives coming up with a solution for women's needs, developing something with the tools that they had at the time, which was social media, but it wasn't secure and it wasn't right from a governance perspective. So we've invested in some software development to bring it into the hands of women. We worked with 15 mums through the Maternity Voices Partnership to co-design this with them, and it's getting fantastic feedback. So it doesn't do everything. It certainly doesn't. You know, there are baby apps out there are pregnancy tracker apps out there, and everyone I meet says, oh, isn't there something that already does that? Maybe there is, but at least this way we've got the 800 women currently using this effectively with Basildon, and our midwives designed it and it works for them. And then I'm going to hand over to Gary to talk to you about his innovation.
Hello, my name is Gary Cordery. I'm head of medical equipment management services across the group, the 3 hospitals. So essentially this is medical devices. So I'm responsible for around 60,000 pieces of equipment that are used on patients every day, from beds to anesthetic machines to ventilators. So I'm kind of here to show that you can have innovation outside of your own field. So I'm not clinical, as I've just explained. But one of the things I am responsible for is air therapy mattresses. And they're quite often the bane of my life. We never have enough of them. Patients need them all the time. We quite often use it as a simple solution to throw out a problem. And so I tried to look at the problem, could we do something else? And one of the ways we come up with that was trying to look at the resources that were available through the tissue viability service. So a pressure ulcer is defined as localized damage that's on the skin, underlying tissue, and it's normally because a patient isn't moving. So they're not able to wiggle themselves around, and then that area becomes under pressure for too long. So the current issues that we have, we've got lots of patients that come in with existing ulcers. So that can be either from home, from care homes, from primary care. And we have a small tissue viability team, so they're very specialist. If you spent any time with wounds, you'll know that they're not that pleasant to look at. So I think it takes a certain type of nurse to want to deal with those all of the time. We need to triage those to try and get them through quickly. And the trouble is a lot of the analysis that's done is done by, they are trained staff, but it's very subjective because there can be all sorts of different grades, and even experienced nurses will get wounds wrong compared to when you're analysing it against a trained tissue viability nurse. So what can I do about the problem? As I said, I'm not clinical. I am technical, so I must be able to come up with a technical solution to help with this. So what we've created is an app that goes on your phone called Adele, TVM Buddy. Adele stands for Artificial Intelligence, Diagnostic Support, Educational Learning Environment. And that was a very deliberate move. This is decision support. This is not to get rid of tissue viability nurses. This is to aid and help them. This is to give gold standard tissue viability nurse level of intelligence at the bedside for somebody who maybe only sees a pressure ulcer once a week or maybe even once a month. So how do we do this? We do this through machine learning, and I get asked quite a lot of the time that I go in at too high a level and I'm too technical. So I thought I'd try and do the dummies guide to machine learning. So machine learning is a kind of artificial intelligence where a computer can be taught a process. So this is simply, if we have a banana, we can show a computer a picture of a banana, and then if you show it another picture of a banana, it will say, that's a banana. If you teach it quite a few times, eventually you show it a bunch of bananas, it will say, that's a banana. And you say, yeah, that's really good. If you show it anything else, it will say, not a banana. And that's all it knows. So that's essentially what machine learning is. So how can we take that on to the next level? Well, if we then teach it the different colors of bananas, we could then say, how ripe is that? So if you had a preference to how you wanted to eat your bananas, then you could get your phone to say, yes, that's a perfectly acceptable banana, or the next one isn't. So how do we push this through to tissue viability and pressure ulcers? So I've got some images that will come up that I have to warn you are a little bit graphic. So if you're not clinical, or obviously you've just had lunch, it's not great timing. I'm giving you fair warning, maybe look away. So this is just 3 examples of how the app works. So it's looking at a wound, and then in the red at the bottom, it's staged them. And it says what category they are. And this is done instantaneously. It doesn't take a picture of the wound. It does it via the live video on your phone. And nothing is stored on the phone at all. It is all secure. We may look at future, we're talking about connectivity and linking things into care records. We may look at that for future, but for the moment, this is a completely standalone app. And as you can see, it sees the difference between a pressure ulcer, that in that case a category 3 unstageable, a deep tissue injury, and a moisture lesion, which are things that are quite often confused.
Thanks, Gary. So this is our, we're just going to talk a little bit about another example of what we're working on at the moment. That's more in the development stage. And we've got a video from Tony Young, who is, he's a surgeon in Southend. So some of you may well know him in his clinical role there as a urological surgeon. But he also happens to be the national clinical lead for innovation across NHS England and NHS Improvement. So we're very lucky to have him as one of our clinicians. But he wasn't able to come today, but he sent a video to talk about the project he's leading on with us. So,
hello, my name is Tony Young. I'm a consultant urological surgeon at Southend. I'm the Chair and Director of Medical Innovation at Anglia Ruskin University, and I'm also the National Clinical Lead for Innovation here at NHS England. There we are, there's the lobby at Skipton House, just behind me. I'm up on the 5th floor today, but I'm also the Associate Medical Director with responsibilities for innovation at the Mid and South Essex STP. So I'm really sorry I couldn't be there with you today at the conference. I'm actually running one of the educational days for the National Clinical Entrepreneur Programme at NHS England in London. So I can't join you on that. I know my colleagues from the STP, Charlotte and Sarah, are going to be there with you, and are going to do a far better job than I ever could. But I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what the ambition is at a national level, what we're planning to do, particularly around outpatient transformation and the interface between primary and secondary care. And then I'll leave Charlotte and Sarah to tell you some of the more exciting details. So the long-term plan, many of you will be familiar with, published in January this year, has set some really ambitious targets for how we can change, transform, improve quality of care in the NHS. And one of those is around outpatient transformation. We see 100 million patients every year in outpatients, and the ambition we have set ourselves is that 30 million of those we have to take out of the system and do them in a different way. That doesn't mean just moving face-to-face from hospitals into primary care. It means doing things completely differently. So when I was appointed into this new role at the STP in the summer, we looked at what we were doing in this space, and NHS England had some outpatient transformation funds. We applied to that, and we got some funding and national exemplar status for outpatient transformation. So we now have the permission and the blessing of NHS England and Improvement to get on and look at how we can really work with our frontline staff and start to bring forward the change we all know that's out there in many aspects of our lives, in the way we lead our lives. How can we bring that into healthcare? Well, our proposal that you're going to hear about is called virtual polyclinics. So how can we bring together the secondary care expertise, the consultants, the clinical specialists, and put them in partnership with colleagues in primary care, so we're working together? You'll see we've got a number of initiatives we're taking forward under this virtual polyclinic umbrella, which is essentially digitizing the whole outpatient process. We're planning to test and trial a platform that some of you may have heard of called eConsult. This has been used in over 1 million primary care consultations so far in the last 10 years. And what we're planning to do is apply that into secondary care, so that what happens is a referral that you may send in will be reviewed by the consultant, information exchanged directly with the patient, maybe a score sheet, some questionnaires, other information they need to gather. The consultant reviews that again, and maybe on this occasion they want to do some tests or some other things. And potentially it might be possible to close the loop completely and appropriately with the patient without having to bring them up for an outpatient appointment, of course, which could be some months down the line from the initial referral. So what we're hoping to do is see people much more quickly, organise a whole load of tests and investigations that are appropriate before they're physically seen, and perhaps even negate the need for some people to be seen in primary care at all, and actually closing the loop digitally. I think this is really exciting. We're starting in urology, dermatology and rheumatology, and I'm actually, although I'm a practicing urologist at Southend, I'm going to be stepping back from full-time or part-time clinical practice as I am now to help lead this for urology outpatients. And we would love to hear from you. If you've got some great ideas of problems and issues you've had with urology, some changes you would like to see made, we'd love to know what they are. So we build them in. So we're building something in that's relevant to our primary care colleagues, all the clinicians across primary care, but also to people in secondary care, and of course to our patients and their carers too. So I hope you have a great conference, and I'm really sorry I couldn't be there. And I look forward to meeting some of you as we start. Our project should be starting hopefully in January time. We'll have our prototype up and running, and I think it's going to be really, really exciting. Okay, have a great day. Bye.
Yeah, that's about the only time I can get Tony to keep to the time that he's available to speak. So that's it's a good way of doing it from my perspective. So this is a new, as Tony said, we're one of the 5 areas that NHS England's elective care transformation programme is working with to accelerate, perhaps more quickly than the NHS might be able to do at scale, the digital by default approach to outpatients where appropriate for patients. And we're looking at, this is a current process of working with 2 surgeons from Southend. We mapped what happens in their clinic. As you can see, we've got the green post-its, which are sort of the hospital-based processes. We've got the pink, which is what the patient sees. So this is what a current process looks like to get through a clinic. Touch points in the clinic where the clinician doesn't even really know why they're happening anymore. It's just a model of care that's always gone on. So it's ripe for improvement and ripe for change. And we spend an awful lot of our time delivering services in the old way. So I won't. Slides will come around. I won't give you this and go through this in a lot of detail because it looks like death by PowerPoint, but things can be very different as Tony has described. So we've done some audit work in Southend recently, asking, I think very similarly to somebody talked about earlier on before, did you need to come in today to the consultation? Could you have done this differently? Could you have had a phone call? And the same with professionals as well, to match the expectations between professionals and patients. And we know that a number of patients would be very comfortable with receiving trusted information and contact from healthcare professionals in a different way. And it's not just about not using up people's time and energy, but also the environmental impact of all the cars on the roads. I think it's about 4% of all the journeys on the road are somebody going to or from an NHS hospital. So this is not sustainable for us in the future, and anyone who tries to get into the front of one of our hospitals at the right time will know all about that. So we're looking for practice to work with on this. As Tony said, we're looking at rheumatology, dermatology and benign urology to start with, and this is generally about moving away from the idea of routine referrals and lots of waits and lots of booked appointments. So something digital could look similar to this, which kind of Tony was describing. So NHS app that we've talked about, that may be the perfect front end for that. It may be very consistent with what patients are seeing in primary care. We don't want the hospital to impose things on people that don't fit with channeling patients to us in the right way. We know most of the contacts go on elsewhere. We know most of the trusted relationships and diagnostics going on elsewhere. So how can we promote self-care? How can we bring expertise that's traditionally locked into hospitals out to patients directly and to other professionals? And these are some of the percentages which research has shown could be achieved in terms of redirecting patient care. And as I say, Tony's leading on some of this stuff nationally, and we understand through that this would be achievable in our area. So if you're interested in the idea of virtual polyclinics and working with us around blurring some of those traditional boundaries between primary and secondary care, then do let us know. So that's just some examples really of some of the digital innovation that we've done or are doing within the hospital group. And Sarah's going to talk a little bit more about the practicalities, some of the challenges of bringing in digital transformation and adopting it.
Good afternoon. Hello, my name's Sarah Mills. I'm Innovation Programme Manager at Mid and South Essex Hospital Group. I've been asked to come today to talk to you about some of the practicalities and the realities of delivering innovation. So why would we do things innovatively? Why don't we just do things the way that we've always done them? Well, actually, if you embed innovation in your organisation, then you will provide more effective patient care. And that's something that I think we can all agree on, and that we would all want to do. And so we owe it to the patients that we serve to do things differently. And innovation is therefore core to transformation at Mid and South Essex Hospital. As Charlotte has already described, the organisation is going through a massive transformation, becoming a merged organisation, and innovation has been seen as a lever to provide some of the excellence around that transformation, and it's really embedded in the strategic direction of the organisation. So we have pledged to surface and incubate innovation both locally with innovators who are already working within our organisations, but also in bringing external innovators in to test and prove their concepts within our organisation. Now, it sounds great, doesn't it? Let's be innovative. But actually, it needs some structure. And how do you go about finding the innovators within your local system? How do you go about surfacing what they're doing? How do you give them permission to do things differently? And what we did is we actually commissioned a diagnostic of innovation currently within the Mid and South Essex Hospitals Group and found that there were pockets of innovation. There were people like Gary, for example, who are doing really interesting, relevant work that will have improved outcomes for patients and will help staff feel more empowered in the job that they're able to do. And so what we need to do is find a way of finding those ideas, surfacing them, have a consistent approach to supporting them, adopt them, adapt them, scale them, spread them, ensure that those best ideas become business as usual, and also manage the risks involved by having creative and transparent governance. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So what we've done is we've formalised our approach to innovation, and actually initially that innovation structure started with the hospital group, but we've now extended that with Tony's role and with the Innovation Fellowship to actually run across the whole of the Mid and South Essex STP. So we have an Innovation Fellowship, which is a kind of a talent pipeline for innovators, so people can apply both from within the system and externally to the system to tell us about their innovation. We provide them with some support, mentorship, navigate the system, broker relationships with clinical teams. There's me as a sort of central innovation function to kind of provide them some support. And we've got 10 innovators that joined the programme in 18-19, and we've got more to be added in 19-20, and those will be announced probably next week or the week after. We also owe it to the patients that we serve to look around the horizon and see what's coming, to make sure that we're adopting and adapting those that are the most beneficial to and align with our strategy. There are national innovation programmes, so there's an NHS England innovation technology payment where organisations are paid to deliver particular already proven innovations that have been shown to benefit patient populations. For example, MyCOPD, some of you might have heard of that, that's already been rolled out. Urolift, which is something that Tony has championed previously. We also have a ways of working framework, which is a kind of memorandum of understanding across the STP, which is another way which we can formalise the way that we bring innovation into the system. And that's about working with industry partners. So we have to recognise that some of the innovations that are out there come from commercial businesses, and that we need to work with them in a way where risk is managed and we're being efficient and we're doing all the due diligence around working with those organisations. And the ways of working framework is one of the ways that we aim to mitigate some of those risks and formalise some of those relationships and make sure that we are adhering to the standards set by the ABPI and other organisations. We also have, as Charlotte mentioned, some of our own products. So she talked about Maternity Direct. There's also Smart. So it's about developing those, recognising where there are staff that are doing things in innovative ways. I know today is about digital, but not all of the innovations that we surface are digital. There's some interesting things around pipelines of talent, generation medics, etc., which also are very innovative, but don't have a digital genesis, and we want to adapt and adopt those as well. Now, the thing about innovation is that it is inherently risky. It's new, it's unproven. And so when you're adopting it, you have to recognise that not everything is going to work. and that there is risks that need to be mitigated. And one of the ways that you can mitigate that is to take a strategic approach to risk. So you can have your big bets, and those are your NHS, ITP products, the things that have already been through the proof of concept stage, the beta testing, they have gone through prototyping, and now they are a substantial solution which we can adopt. Those are our big bets. The chances are that we'll adopt those and they will show benefit. There's also early stage ideas. So this is really what the Innovation Fellowship that I spoke about earlier, that's what this is about. This is about things which are maybe concepts or very much in their prototyping phase, which we don't know what benefit they are going to confer to our population. The innovators themselves are making assumptions. This is more akin to research, but it's not research, it's innovation. It's new. We don't necessarily go through all of the kind of RCT, the randomized controlled trial type evidence to back these. We have real world validation, so we get them out in the system and we see if they work. And we work with the people who are using them in terms of the staff and in terms of the patients to see if they are viable. And then we have our kind of mid-range ideas. So these are things that are not quite evidence-based yet, not quite proven, but are beyond that early prototyping. So they've been used in maybe a kind of select number of organisations. People have used them and adopted them. And one of those is Forward, which is a messaging app. And we've got someone from Forward here to talk to you a little bit about that. And in that element, innovation must add value. Yes, it's unproven. Yes, it's a risk, but we need to make sure that it's adding value to our system. And so that's about aligning it with some of our priorities. So for example, in the Innovation Fellowship that I mentioned, we had 3 key themes this year that all the innovations had to fall into. One of them was outpatients, one of them was digitally enabled care, and one of them was self-care and patient activation. So I think probably most of you will recognize those as important drivers to where we want to reach in our system. And one of the ways that we can make sure that innovation adds value is to ask some questions. So we need to find out what the problems are. So in the case of Forward, we recognize that our current channels for communication that were being used across the hospital were not GDPR compliant, WhatsApp, for example. So we needed to create a value proposition. So what did we need a solution to that GDPR in compliance to be? Well, it was about simplifying and facilitate instant messaging for staff in a way that was GDPR compliant. Well, what would we do then? Well, we would trial Forward across the MSE group, adopt it, adapt it, review it. And one of the things that we've learned from using Forward is that we had to be quite specific around the use case, that we needed some really strong comms. We needed a policy around instant messaging usage to ensure that people were using it in a safe way and not in an inappropriate way. And in that way, we mitigate the risk of introducing something new into our organisation. And to that end, it's that good innovation requires good governance. And in fact, NHS Digital have recognised this. They have a clinical risk management team. They have a number of clinical safety documentation. There's the DCB 160, which is around organisations ensuring that they are doing the due diligence around clinical safety risk for digital products. There's also an equivalent of that for suppliers. Forward as an example, who also have to provide a hazard log. So it's about recognising, surfacing the risks that are inherent with doing something differently, with introducing something that's maybe not evidence-based, and managing that. So information governance toolkits, we make sure that things that are digital meet the Caldecott principles. We've got an innovation governance process around how we manage and formulate the risks around innovation. So that's an advisory group which Tony chairs, a number of people across the STP. We've got a board member for innovation, just to ensure that there is that good governance. And also, on top of good governance, you also need good engagement. When you're asking people to do things differently, when you're asking people to take a bet on trying something new where there isn't necessarily those proven benefits, then you need to bring those people on board early. You need to keep them on board. And you can see there's Charlotte talking about the Innovation Fellowship on our intranet. There's a picture of the bridging team, the local bridging team who have adopted Forward, showing their enthusiasm for the new. And when you do bring people in and you engage them, you do find that they're really enthusiastic. They become champions of this new way of working, and they're doing the job for you, really. And so just finally, digital innovation in the real world. So implementation is as important as the idea. So yes, it's fantastic to have a good idea, but it is that good governance and that good engagement which will facilitate the adoption of that idea. It's time consuming. It's my substantive role to support innovation, but there could be 10 of me, and there would still be more to do. And it takes the discretionary effort of people like Gary above and beyond their day job to pursue something new and to work hard to bring it into realization. Like I said, good governance to mitigate risks, stakeholder engagement at all stages, and hold your nerve and keep the faith. That's what you have to do. Believe in it. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ridian Harris. There's a few people in the room who are wearing two hats today, and I'm one of them. So I'm first and foremost a doctor, but I'm here today in my role as implementation lead at Forward. I'd like to tell you a little bit about what Forward is and some of the really exciting work that we've done with the Mid and South Essex Hospital Group. Share some of our lessons that we've learned as innovators working with NHS trusts, and perhaps give a glimpse of the future of sort of where we're hoping to go with the platform. So, as I said, we're a startup called Forward. Every startup is convinced it has a solution, and every solution needs a problem. So, the problem that we are trying to solve through Forward is communication. Now, that'll mean different things to different people, but communication first and foremost between healthcare professionals, whether it's fax machines that don't work, having to use WhatsApp to share patient information, or something as simple as not being able to take a photo securely. It delays care up and down the country every single day. Our attempt at solving that problem is to design, in partnership with NHS care teams, a secure instant messaging and photo capture app with an Active Directory. So you need to take a photo of something, you can do it securely, export that photo to NHS email. If you need to get in touch with someone, you can send them a message, you can share patient information securely, safely, in real time. It's fantastic to be able to talk about that, but what does that mean in practice? So to give you some examples of how it's been used in Essex, Sarah mentioned the bridging team, so you'll have seen that photo before. The bridging team are quite literally a bridge for patients between hospital and home. So they're supporting patients who've been recently discharged from hospital, often quite a vulnerable phase in their treatment journey, often with a rapidly changing clinical picture. Previously, the team told us that if there were changes, for example, a carer was unable to look after a patient, their only option was often to call an ambulance. They were essentially stuck out in the middle of nowhere with no way of looking after that patient or calling in support. They had to take that patient straight back to hospital. Through using Forward, they've got a network where they can cascade information. They can call for help. They can ask for someone to call around for an emergency carer. And in the words of John Walter, who's their operational lead, who I had a chat with a few days ago, he said that it's now the case that 999 is a last resort, as it should be. It's only taken once you've exhausted all other options via Forward. Just to share with you a couple of other use cases that have happened up and down the country, perhaps in the sort of spirit of sharing good practice from different parts of the UK. It was awesome to hear about Gary talking about use and tissue viability of his AI app. Absolutely fantastic. We've taken a slightly different approach to tissue viability, which is to get the photo to a tissue viability specialist nurse. So in Kingston, where I did some of my clinical training, teams on the medical admissions unit there can take a photo of a pressure ulcer, and send that straight away to their tissue viability team who can offer an opinion. It's meant that patients can be discharged quicker, treatments can start sooner, and crucially, things are picked up sooner. So a patient with a pressure ulcer, it's imaged and recorded in A&E at the front door. It's not picked up 3 days later on MAU when it might appear that that's a hospital-acquired injury. So, it's affecting the bottom line in terms of fines and things as well, which is always important. Final thing just to touch upon, particularly as we're at a primary care conference, I talked about photo capture. There's a network of 50 GPs in Gloucestershire who are using Forward to take photos of vascular changes, moles, rashes, share them with dermatology colleagues. The problem previously being you'd have to find the practice digital camera in a locked cupboard somewhere. They can just take a photo with their smartphone, upload it to NHS Mail, and then input it usually into System C. So there's, I suppose, part of the reason for sharing that is, it's important to look all over the country. There's great practice everywhere. It was really cool to hear about that midwifery and maternity app as well. It's amazing to hear what's going on. I think Essex is a real hub for innovation, which reminds me, big thank you to the innovation team here in Mid and South Essex who've just been fantastic with us, putting that faith in us. You guys are a fantastic team, so thank you. Just to touch on the future, which I talked about, to pose you a very quick question. Have you ever wondered what a communication network in a hospital or a CCG might look like? Perhaps not. So I'll show you this. This is a person. Let's call him Stephen, and let's say he's a physiotherapist. What if you could see what the communication network for a physiotherapist looked like over the course of a week? You can. That's what a physiotherapy department looks like when they're talking to each other. Each node is a person, each line is a communication channel, a message or a photo. Imagine if you could map that over the course of time. You could visualize what a hospital network looks like, over the course of a day or a week. You get this beautiful pattern of seeing who comes onto a network at what time of day, who do they communicate with, where are the pressure points, when is it difficult to get hold of pharmacy, all those sorts of really interesting questions. You could then map that nationally. And this is data we've pulled out of the Forward network. It's really cool to see. Just to drill that down into something a bit more tangible, that's the Mid and South Essex Forward network. So we talked about the bridging team. They're down there at 6 o'clock where you've got one line into a little cluster. Things to pull out, there's a huge amount of use in community midwifery. Up at the top is a pharmacy group at Broomfield Hospital. It's really exciting to see this as we move it to be beyond just a messaging platform. You're starting to be able to capture data that's been lost before because it's just lost into the bleep system, and then being able to work with NHS organisations to say, this is what a communication network looks like. Here's the pressure points. Here's the problems. So I'll leave it there. Thanks very much for your time.